So we've had a great morning. Now we have a great afternoon that'll be just as great. And so I have the honor of introducing one of my really good friends, Christian Benedetto, who I introduced before, who you saw in the video. So Christian's going to come up and introduce our illustrious speaker. So Christian.
Thanks, Dale. I have the privilege of having known Dale when he only had 3 Ivy League degrees before he got his doctorate. So we've known him for quite some time, and his resume is incredible. He's Father March with Martin Luther King, and he was the head of Deputy Director of DCA, and the list goes on. So, Dr. Oz is the reason he went to University of Pennsylvania. But our next speaker, or keynote speaker, is my good friend Rich, and you read his bio. He knows more about trauma than anyone should have to know about trauma. He's been a tireless advocate for victims in New Jersey, and his model has spread across the country. And he is, listen to every word he has to say, take notes. His cards are out there. He's an endless resource for everyone. And with that, Rich, come on up and. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Don't take notes. Just sit back, relax. If you still have some dessert on your plate, eat it. I just have to move some of this water because I have a cold, so I need some water. I'm just blown away so far, I have to tell you. I've been to every kind of conference you can imagine over the last almost 30 years. And I'm a real critic. It's a phenomenal event today, and I know a lot of you are thinking that. And it has a lot to do with who's here. You know, many of you have given presentations before, and it's the audience that determines your presentation. It's the audience that determines the quality of the event. I was remarking to a friend of mine sitting at the table, what I'd like to do is take this on the road to every bar association. We have 21, every county bar association in New Jersey, and maybe we can educate some of the lawyers. So I thank you for giving me the opportunity to say a few words to you. My wife and I were having coffee this morning, very early, and she's had to sit through a lot of my speeches everywhere. And she just looked at me with a half-hearted grin on her face, and she said, "Do you have any idea what you're talking about today?" And because she knows, I mean, it was a rhetorical question for her, because the answer is no. How can you know what you're going to talk about until you get in the environment where you're going to speak? And you start feeling the enlightenment of the people there, and you literally need to absorb the energy that's there. And that's when you know what you're going to talk about. So as I stand here, I'm knowing what I'm going to talk about because it's coming out as it comes into my brain. I don't know any other way to function. And my wife's an attorney, and my one son is an attorney, and they're used to getting up before the court and making sure they have their written argument and everything. And it sometimes blows their mind that I do it the way I do it. But I have been a lawyer now for, 45 years. Okay, so I don't have a whole lot of time. You know, this is really a special weekend for me personally. You know, all of you, sometimes you reflect on your lives, you have those moments in your life that you say were like life-defining, life-changing, and you know, to a lot of people that they may be trite, but to you they were incredibly important because our lives are incredibly important. And it just so happens today's October 5th, and October 7th is literally a day I celebrate every year. And I have, I'm doing the math, for the past 49 years. What was October 7, 1968? Many of you are out there saying, how the hell would I know? I wasn't even born then. October 7, 1968 was my senior year of college. I was in my next to last semester, and the city of Newark was not in pretty good shape. If some of you are old enough to remember, the country was not in that good a shape. And I was in school, and it was the 5th game of the World Series between the Tigers and the Cardinals. And back then, baseball was the national pastime. And with my friends, we sat down, we cut class, and we had a little black and white TV in one of my friends' rooms, and we were going to watch the 5th game of the World Series. And I was excited. I was rooting for the Cardinals, as some of you may know, they lost. But sat there and waiting for the game to start, and all of a sudden on the screen, I see a young man walking with a dog and a guitar, and he sat down, and they said, we will now play the Star-Spangled Banner. You get a sense how important it is to me. And this young Puerto Rican fellow named Jose Feliciano sat there and he sang the Star-Spangled Banner like no one had ever heard it before at a sporting event. And I sat there and I was literally blown away. I was blown away for many reasons. I'm an Italian kid from a little town called Netcong, if any of you know where that is in western Morris County. My 4 grandparents were Italian immigrants, never learned to write a word of English. And between the 4 of them, they raised 19 kids, sent a half a dozen of them or more off to the war when they were just kids, and literally built a foundation for people like me to have the thought that back in 1968 I could be going to college. Of course, being the second person in our entire family to go to college. And it deeply moved me, and that was good. That was good. But it was the next day that really knocked me off the chair, because much to my surprise, the media literally tore that young man apart. He didn't get up there and sing it like Kate Smith or Robert Merrill or the traditional military approach to the Star-Spangled Banner. He sang the song like a young person who had the visceral appreciation of what this country is. And I could not believe some of the news reports. One of them said that military people were sitting on their couches throwing beer cans at their television. The New York Times, not exactly the bastion of conservatism even back then, used the word disgraceful. And I recall it was at that moment, that time, that day, that week, that I saw all of this and I started having these feelings. And I was taking a course in public speaking, and I was told we had to do an emotive speech. So that was an easy one for me. And I just got up and I let it all out. And after I let it all out, I took a step back and took stock of me. I was a business major. My life was planned. I was going to get my degree in business the next May, try to get into business, to get my MBA in business before I got drafted, get a good job in a company, raise 2.3 children, learn how to play golf, and probably retire in my mid-50s with some kind of pension plan or whatever. And that would be my life. It was totally uneventful. If any of you ever watched that old movie with Andy Griffith, No Time for Sergeants, when the sergeant is saying, here's what you do. You don't make ripples, you don't make waves. We grew up at a time you don't make waves, and you can literally get through your life without doing anything significant, but without being harmed. Maybe that was the philosophy then, but it sure as hell wasn't going to be my philosophy. And before I knew it, I was sitting down and I was reading everything I could on civil rights, and then I started reading everything about lawyers. And it was maybe a month when I went to my parents and said, I've decided I want to be a lawyer and I want to be a civil rights lawyer. That sounds wonderful, doesn't it? And I did. I went to law school, and I started the fall of '69, and went through 3 years of law school that I literally loved every minute. I'm one of these people that all those years back, I still miss law school. Why? Because there was a purity about law school. It was cerebral, it was visceral. It wasn't about making money. And when you took courses in defendants' rights or poverty law, civil rights, it enabled you to expand your mind, expand your heart, and think. And what the law can do, it's all about the law in this country. And if the law can be this instead of this country, this world could be phenomenal. And so for 3 years, I lived in my own fantasy, so to speak. And finally, in my last semester of law school, in 1972, I did what a lot of people do. I went to a barber for the first time in 3 years and got my shoulder hair cut. I shaved off my Fu Manchu. You know, back then the Fu Manchu was cool because who wore a Fu Manchu? Joe Willie Namath in '68, '69, right? And he was the coolest guy in the world. I went out, I remember I bought a 3-piece blue suit for $55, a pair of brown wingtips, and I put those, if they were dreams, I put them on a shelf. I had a child, I was married, I had to become a realist again. And for the next 17 years, I came back to Jersey because this is my home. And for the next 17 years, I became a money lawyer. Started a law firm, built the law firm. We were doing as well as could be. We lived in the house. We built the house that we wanted, our dream house. I'm still in it today. I know every nail and every stud in that house. We had an apartment in Manhattan where we would go to on weekends. And I guess I was living my own modified American dream. And then in 1989, my oldest of 5 was a senior in high school, was at someone's home. He was asleep. It was at night. Some people came there who nobody knew. He heard a girl calling for help. He came down to help her, and the fellow attacked him with a knife and killed him. So when we talk about trauma, how do I describe my personal trauma? Probably definitely the way that I discuss it with so many people who come in to me for help. And that it's like you're exploded into a gazillion pieces and the wind is blowing and the pieces are scattered everywhere. Now, it's hard enough for you to pick up your own pieces, as many of you know. But when you have your wife and you have at that time we had 3 other children, our 5th came along later. But when you have those children to care for, then they don't know about picking up their pieces. And that's the reason, that's one of the things that I've learned throughout these years, and I say this to victims, especially survivors of homicide, is when they say to me, and they say some things that are just frightening. I had one fellow call me up and say, Rich, I got good news for you. And I said, what's that? His name was Chet. I said, what's that, Chet? And he said, I've got cancer. I've got 6 months. And I said to him, that's not good news. And he said, come on, who are you kidding? But when you have people on this earth whom you love much more than you hate your pain, then you can survive. And if there's anything I've learned, it's about healing. That working? Yeah. And so I had no choice. I had to survive. This is a community here today, and someone commented about Christian having the courage to literally open his heart out to help advance the understanding and the knowledge of post-traumatic stress disorder. And I think that's so critical because that's what we have to do. We have to be honest and human with each other. And so when I say to you, since I don't need this, I'll be more like I am in court. Technology. It's not working. Oh, it is. So when I say to you, all right, don't worry about it. So when I say to you that at one point my wife looked at me and said, I understand your pain, and if you can't do this, I promise you, I'll raise our kids. I don't say make comments like this or tell things about me to anyone I've talked to. But I give you this example because this is the energy that's been created in this room today. Now, what do you do? What do you do when you're a victim and all of a sudden you're confronted with the reality of this institution called the criminal justice system that you believed all your life was there for you? I mean, you knew if you did anything wrong, the criminal justice system was going to punish you. And conversely, you assumed that if something happened to you, that this criminal justice system would at least protect you, at least somewhat embrace you, because you're the good guy. Well, I will tell you this. That was a dream, perhaps, but it was a misconception, and it certainly wasn't a reality. Victims' rights came about as a result of Ronald Reagan's effort to change the criminal justice system. Back in 1981, he commissioned a task force to study the impact of the criminal justice system on victims of violence. And after almost 2 years of his study, they came up with several conclusions, or many conclusions actually. And one of them, and I'm quoting to you, it said, somewhere along the way the system began to serve the lawyers, the judges, and the defendants, and treat victims of crime with institutionalized disinterest. It went on to say the treatment of crime victims is a national disgrace. Institutionalized disinterest. You heard some discussion today about the institutions. And what has happened is the institutions have taken over in many aspects. So when you are a victim of a crime, what do you do? And you want to survive and you want to do something about it. One of the things that I knew that in order for me to survive, I had to pay respect to my son's life. I had to use the fact that I'm a lawyer and do something good with it. And since we were treated so badly in the criminal justice system, I knew that this was the way I had to go. And you know, when you get out of law school and you have to practice law, then those beautiful ideas you had, those lofty ideas, the majesty of law, gets put on a shelf and it gets substituted by the practicality of law. And the practicality of law is based on money. And unfortunately, I subscribed to the same religion for 17 years of my practice, but I knew I couldn't do that anymore. And here I was, a white guy, living in Sussex County, New Jersey, a town called Sparta, not really having a whole lot of an idea of what the criminal justice system was like. Now, lawyers seem to think once they get out of law school and they pass the bar, they own the justice system. Well, you know what the justice system is in reality, and I'm glad I'm not speaking before a bar association. They'd start throwing things. Did you ever see the I Love Lucy segment where Lucy and Ethel are working in the candy factory? That's what's happened in the criminal justice system. That assembly line goes faster and faster, and you see all those little pieces of chocolate? That's you and me and all the people. And they get lost. And the best that could happen to them, they either get eaten by Lucy and Ethel or they get put in a box. And that's what the criminal justice system was developing into. And I'm sorry to say it's somewhat like that now. What's the plea bargain rate in the state of New Jersey? 99%. Now, there are arguments we need plea bargaining. Of course we need plea bargaining. But 99% doesn't make sense because what that does is that comes on, the order comes from on high. It comes from the Supreme Court to the county courts, to the prosecutors who are subject to the judges, and it says, you plea bargain this case. You tell this young woman who was violently raped that we're downgrading the charge to simple assault. And you think I'm being dramatic? We did a count a couple years ago as to how many victims we've taken through our victim law center, and we're up at 17,000. And I can't tell you the number of victims that I've had to sit with and try to explain to them why your daughter's rapist is getting simple assault and not even probation. Why the person who killed your child, it was downgraded to manslaughter, and he's getting 2 years in prison. Victims think they're going to get justice. It just doesn't happen. It doesn't happen too often. And what we need to understand, I think, is that, and we've heard so much of it today, is that the justice process is an ever-moving dynamism of humanity. There's good, there's bad. It's not political. It doesn't mean that you should be hard right-wing and demand the death penalty for people. Life isn't that simple. It doesn't mean that you should be far left-wing and say everybody who's accused must have had a problem in their life and therefore let them go. It's about people. And the reality of it is we live in a state that is the most densely populated state in the nation. And what I learned was that while my concept of what victimization was and the way the courts treated it, that's not the way life was. Because as I began reaching out to people saying, here's what I'm doing. I've got this idea. I'm going to start a pro bono victim law center, and I'm going to represent you in your civil rights in the criminal justice system. And if you're treated badly, if your rights are violated, we're going to represent you for free. The idea I had, we're now in our 26th year of doing it. We're the first in the nation. I think there are 3 others that are using us as a model. But one of the things you realize is life is not that simple. It's not that simple because the young man who was killed also had a brother who's in prison. The fact of the matter is families are dynamic. Life is ever moving. And we need to stop drawing lines in this country. We need to stop politicizing it. As you know, many of you know, the death penalty was on the books from 1982 until 2012 when it was abolished again. The reason it was abolished is because I pulled together a group of crime victims to say that the death penalty is not worth it in New Jersey. It makes no sense. We shouldn't execute anybody. And from the victim's standpoint, it keeps the victim in the system for almost 20 years. Because in a state like New Jersey, and let's face it, we are a liberal state, the Supreme Court said we are never going to have someone executed on our watch. But rather than taking this right-wing line in the sand position on law and order, we tried to take, and we did take, and it was successful in demonstrating to the people in the legislature that stuff like that just doesn't work. We need to look at every situation from the standpoint of humanism. We heard talk earlier this morning about victims of domestic violence. I've been around a long time, as you can see. I was telling someone before, I said most people my age, or most lawyers my age, are looking to retire. And I've had the blessing of meeting some remarkable people in the city of Newark over the past couple years. And we've got some projects going that just keep my juices flowing until I sometimes can't fall asleep. We have a domestic violence and sexual assault project going. I have about a half a dozen attorneys, and we're doing pro bono representation for them. But, you know, one of the things I've learned, and here's where I think the problems fail, or the situations fail, is we have the people making the rules, primarily in the government, and the federal government, saying, we're going to give you this money for a grant, and you have to do it the way we say you have to do it. Well, I say, you've been doing it that way for too long, and it hasn't worked. You know, back in I talked about 68 before, and all of you remember back then the impact that Bobby Kennedy had on this country. And you remember one of Kennedy's quotes, some people look at things the way they are, and they ask why. I dream of things that never were, and I ask why not. That is what we here today are about. Every one of us here is a survivor in some event or another. And if there's anything that I've learned that I would bet my heart on, is that the reason change has come about in this country is not because those on high in the government have all of a sudden had an epiphany as to what it should be. It's because people who have suffered violence, people who have suffered racism, discrimination, they were all victims, and they turned it around. It was their dreams that made it change. What do? When someone says, well, what does a victim's rights lawyer do? And my response is this: you come into my room, into my office, and whatever your problems are, that's why I am here. If it's the fact that the prosecutor is trying to do a plea bargain in your case, that's absolutely outrageous. If it's a fact that the judge was disrespectful to your daughter on the witness stand, if it's a fact that the murder trial of the killer of your child is going on right now and the judge won't let you in the courtroom to witness it, it's about every problem you could have. It's the fact that if you have to go to the trial of the killer of your child, no one knows what it's like for you to experience the fact that the night before you're frightened to death because of what you have to go through the next day. And how do you get up, and how do you walk through getting ready to go? And how do you get in the car and drive to the courthouse? You're so shaken sometimes you can't see one light, whether it's red or green. And where do you park? And how far do you have to go to get to the courthouse? And when you walk in that courtroom, you're the one who's different. Everybody there either has a job there or they're interested in what's going on in your case. But for you, it's your heart that's in the hands of everything. That's what it's all about. It's whatever your problem is. That dictates what we do as advocates. That dictates what we do as servants. So what is the solution? The solution is easy. You know, I'm not preaching religion. You know, I'm a fallen Catholic. But I got to tell you this, the one thing my wife and I have done for the past 40 plus years is preach one thing to our kids, and that's simple, the golden rule. It's that simple. All the other stuff is bull, and we all know it. All the other stuff is posturing. All the other stuff is trying to buttress someone's own personal position. When we let go all of that, and we simply say, this person is here because they need me, then we embrace them with all of our power, all of our talent, and all of our will. And when we do that, we hold each other up. I keep going back to '68, the 60s, and I had the absolute benefit of witnessing the civil rights movement in this country. And I got to tell you this. I didn't become a civil rights lawyer when I got out of law school. Like I said, I put it on the shelf. But I got to say, I'm sure proud that I'm one now. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. My dad knew in March with Dr. King, and I have a favorite picture of Dr. King, Ralph Abernathy, and my dad, so just hearing you talk, it's very, very moving. Very, very moving. Well, we have now an opportunity to see two wonderful videos. And I've talked about Prudential, our title sponsor. We have a video, The El Paso Story, a journey from military career to civilian career. So if we could run that, and I'll introduce some of the principles related to that. Prudential is truly one of the most amazing companies in the world, literally. Seems like every week they surprise me by all the wonderful things they do. I'd like to ask Mr. James Beamisturfer to stand up, and let's give him a round of applause for supporting this conference. This would not have happened without Prudential, and so our hat's off to you for supporting us, but supporting people around the world, and thank you so very, very much. We now have the honor of recognizing a true hero. Medal of Honor recipient, Sergeant Dakota L. Meyer. We have a video, and I'll say more about him after the video.
The President of the United States, in the name of the Congress, takes pleasure in presenting the Medal of Honor to Corporal Dakota L. Meyer, United States Marine Corps, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, while serving with Marine Embedded Training Team 28, Regional Corps Advisory Command 37 in Konar Province, Afghanistan, on 8 September 2009. Corporal Meyer maintained security at a patrol rally point while other members of his team moved on foot with 2 platoons of Afghan National Army and Border Police into the village of Ganjagal for a pre-dawn meeting with village elders. Moving into the village, the patrol was ambushed by more than 50 enemy fighters, firing rocket-propelled grenades, mortars, machine guns from fortified positions on the slopes above. Hearing over the radio that 4 U.S. team members were cut off, Corporal Meyer seized the initiative. With a fellow Marine driving, Corporal Meyer took the exposed gunner's position in a gun truck as they drove down the steeply terraced terrain in a daring attempt to disrupt the enemy attack and locate the trapped U.S. team. Disregarding intense enemy fire, now concentrated on their lone vehicle, Corporal Meyer killed a number of enemy fighters with the mounted machine guns and his rifle, some at near point-blank range, as he and his driver made 3 solo trips into the ambush area. During the first 2 trips, he and his driver evacuated 24 Afghan soldiers, many of whom were wounded. When one machine gun became inoperable, he directed the return to the rally point to switch to another gun truck for a 3rd trip into the ambush area, where his accurate fire directly supported the remaining U.S. personnel and Afghan soldiers fighting their way out of the ambush. Despite a shrapnel wound to his arm, Corporal Meyer made 2 more trips into the ambush area in a 3rd gun truck, accompanied by 4 other Afghan vehicles, to recover more wounded Afghan soldiers and search for the missing U.S. team members. Still under heavy enemy fire, he dismounted the vehicle on the 5th trip and moved on foot to locate and recover the bodies of his team members. Corporal Meyer's daring initiative and bold fighting spirit throughout the 6-hour battle significantly disrupted the enemy's attack and inspired the members of the command force to fight on. His unwavering courage and steadfast devotion to his U.S. and Afghan comrades in the face of almost certain death reflected great credit upon himself and upheld the highest traditions of the Marine Corps and the United States Naval Service.
Let's stand and give a round of applause for Sergeant Dakota Meyer, a true hero. Your service brings tears to my eyes. I think we're ready for the panel. Do we have the name plates for the panelists? What? We take a break? Well, let me do that before. I think it's worth, it's here, but worth reading. And we heard some of it. Sergeant Dakota L. Meyer is a U.S. Marine Corps veteran, the recipient of the Medal of Honor, the military's highest honor, and the New York Times best-selling author of Into the Fire, a first-hand account of the most extraordinary battle in the Afghan War. He's also an entrepreneur, having founded a construction company in Kentucky. Meyer earned his medal for his actions during the Battle of Ganjagal, which was part of Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. Over the course of a 6-hour firefight, Meyer braved enemy fire to find and save fellow members of his embedded training team. He is the first living Marine to have received the medal since 1973 and one of the youngest. Again, thank you, sir, for your service. And we're going to take a 5-minute break or so, and we'll start our last panel.